Hey, welcome to a new episode of Worlds Collide. This is the podcast where I talk to people about their experiences abroad. And I am your host, Viktoria. Before we start, I wanted to make sure that you follow this podcast on your podcast app. So push the button in the corner of your app so you will never miss an episode. And if you also want to help me out a little bit and like this podcast, then you could give it a 5-star rating on your podcast app, or maybe even, if this is not too much to ask for, write a sentence or two on Apple Podcast. And yeah, that would be great. So thank you so much for that. That was that. So now it's the time for this week's interview. Here it is. So my guest today is Dr. Joey Liu. Hi, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So where are you right now?
I am currently in Taiwan.
Okay, cool. And I don't know even much about Taiwan. So where in Taiwan are you?
So we're a small-ish island off of China. So we have a long history with China. Our ancestors, many of our ancestors came from China. So we're right there, south of Japan and 2 hours north of the Philippines.
Okay, and which city are you in?
I'm in a smaller city, so it's not well known, but it's Pingzhen. If you ever come to Taiwan, you'll fly into Taoyuan. That's where the airport is. And we're about 20 minutes away from the airport.
Okay. And so what brought you to Taiwan?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was actually born in Taiwan, and I lived here. Yes, so this is considered home for me. But my mother is American, my father is Hakka from Taiwan, and we ended up relocating to the US before I was 3, just around the age of 3.
Okay.
And I grew up there, met my husband there. My children were born in the US in California. But for me, I've always felt homesick for Taiwan. I actually ended up living here for a little bit when I was 18 after high school, before college. And I've always just tried to get myself back to Taiwan. And that felt impossible, like after marrying an American. But he randomly said to me 2 years ago, he was like, maybe we can move to Taiwan. And I was like, really?
Let's do it right now.
Let's go. Yes.
Okay.
That's kind of the beginning of the story.
Okay. So I guess your husband does not speak any Taiwanese?
No, and Taiwanese is a language. I don't speak Taiwanese. My culture is Hakka, so that was my first language is Hakka, and then the national language is Mandarin. So my children, I speak to them in Hakka, and they came here to learn Mandarin in school, and my husband speaks none of those languages.
Okay, and did you grow up speaking Hakka?
Yes, so my father actually spoke almost no English when we moved to the US because he spoke Mandarin with my mom. She was fluent in Mandarin, and he spoke Hakka with me and my sisters in the house. And he was able to find a lot of Chinese-speaking clientele when he moved to the US as well. He's a general contractor, builder.
Okay.
So he didn't actually learn English for most of my childhood. He speaks it now, but yeah, I very much grew up trilingually in the US.
Oh, wow. Trilingual even.
Yeah.
Nice. So what was the process like? So when your husband said like, hey, maybe we move to Taiwan, how soon after did you then finally move?
I mean, it was pretty quick that we put everything into motion. Like, he mentioned it in September after we had made a trip to Asia. He also, I should mention, has family in the Philippines. He's half Filipino. So we visited his grandmother in the Philippines. We are so blessed. His grandmother, so my kid's great-grandmother, is still alive. She's 93. My 2 grandparents, my Hakka grandparents, are still alive in Taiwan. So my children, actually, they're blessed to have 5 great-grandparents that they're still able to interact with.
Oh, wow.
So
And
that
they're
was,
like even close by now.
yes, the Philippines is only 2 hours away. So we thought, like, this is such a good opportunity just to be around family, especially, my grandparents. We feel like with being Hakka and having a language that isn't taught in schools or it's an oral history, there's this feeling like once my grandparents pass, a piece of our culture is also going to be
Right.
lost if we don't take the time now to really spend time with them and speak with them, listen to their stories, like, really like preserve our culture. So my husband, when he asked the question, I was like, if we're going to go, we need to go now because time isn't on our side.
Mm-hmm.
And by January, we committed. We looked into renting our home. We owned a home in Southern California. We looked into renting
Uh-huh.
it. In April, my husband goes, what if we just sold our house? Because it was sort of like at the top of the post-pandemic housing market in the
Oh, right,
US
right.
where prices were high. We could
Yeah,
sell
that's
our home
true.
and like make a pretty good profit. And I was like, what? What about our fallback plan? Like, And he was like, no,
Mm-hmm.
let's do it. By May, we listed it. By June, we found a buyer, went into escrow, and by July, we were packed up and on a plane to Taiwan.
Oh, wow. And did you have a place where you could stay in Taiwan?
Yeah, we're really, really lucky. We live in a small neighborhood, and my grandparents have a home on one corner, and we were very traditional. So we live multi generationally. My grandparents
Uh-huh.
live with their youngest son and their two grown sons. And then my auntie lives across the street from us, around the corner from there. And then she had an empty house. So we kind of moved into an abandoned house that was just an extra
Okay.
property in the family.
But
And
that
we came
works.
and cleaned it up and living a minimalist life here. But we're really blessed to not only contribute to like, supporting my auntie a little bit, but also have a
Mm-hmm.
house that we were, able to just move into right away.
So you're a doctor. So were you just like, hey, we go to Taiwan and I gonna work there as a doctor? Because I was just wondering if your degree would be even accepted.
That's a
You
great
know,
question.
because
Yeah,
sometimes the degrees don't like whatever are accepted in another country.
for sure. And I should clarify, even though I have doctor as my title, it's a PhD in education. So I'm not a medical doctor, but
Okay.
yes, I was a tenured educator at the high school level and had finished my PhD and was trying to go into academia in a way
Mm-hmm.
that, I was like unsure because academia felt limiting to me in some ways. But, I had this PhD and I wanted to make a difference in the community and contribute to social change. But the decision to move to Taiwan was really centered on our family first, like
Right.
especially while my
Okay.
kids are young, while they can still learn the language, while my
Yeah.
grandparents are
Great.
still here. So it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like a career based decision. And
Uh-huh.
we kind of made this bold decision to go and just trust that work was going to work out online. So my husband and I
Uh-huh.
both walked away from stable six-figure careers. He was in tech sales, so he also had a remote job.
Okay.
And we really just thought that there would be full-time remote work from anywhere in the world jobs like we'd been seeing ever since the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and we got here and found out that that whole pool was quickly dying up, and the jobs that were out there
Oh,
weren't as receptive to us being in Taiwan. Like my husband was actually offered jobs, and then when they found out that he was located in Taiwan, it was walked back on because there may
I
be
see.
security issues with proximity to China or different reasons.
Okay.
So we actually didn't end up finding full-time work, and that was the door that sort of like had me go back to a creative vision I've had for years and years of starting my own online education business. And I was
Okay.
just like, okay, we have nothing to lose. Let me just go all in
Sure.
and figure that out.
Okay. And
So I started freelancing, getting clients while I was sort of figuring out my niche. And then a couple months ago, I really went all in. I found a need in many of the clients I was working with for story coaching. So I had created a course that I taught in high school around narrative. My PhD is a narrative study. And then I found this need that I never anticipated, that in many professionals and creatives and entrepreneurs, folks need support with actually telling their like founder story, their core story. Even if something as simple as writing their about me page on a website can bring up a lot of blocks for people, right?
right, right.
So I'm able to help my clients now tap into their narratives and connect with their audiences and build their community.
Okay. And so you do this remote, and your clients are, I guess, in the US
Oh
or
my gosh, all over the world.
all over
So,
the world? Right.
yes, primarily English speaking, countries. But I've had a few who are also where English is not their first language, and so I've had clients in Australia, UK, the US, but then also some in like the Middle East and Europe as well.
Do you work then with time zones?
Yeah. It kind of works out because my morning is the evening in the US. So the East Coast
Right?
is a little bit harder to
Yes,
grab.
I
Yeah,
know.
yeah, exactly. So like with professionals who are like, okay, let me just do my sessions in the evening after my workday, right? That works out. Australia is great because we are in the same time zone
Really?
with
Yeah.
Perth and then
East.
2 hours
Oh,
behind.
okay.
And then 2 hours behind Sydney, so we're almost
Hours.
on the same work
Yeah.
days there. Europe, it's their morning in my afternoon, so I get a few of the European clients. So they start early in the morning, maybe before work, or just the beginning of their workday, and it's like when I'm wrapping up my last few clients for
That's
the day.
actually not too bad.
It's not bad at all. I'm not working in the middle of the night here.
Yeah, because I know, like, just for the podcast sometimes, like, for me, the hardest time zone is like Australia, New Zealand,
Mm. New
because
Zealand is a little, that's like in the middle of the ocean, so yeah, it's trickier.
it is like, I'm always even confused. It's like, you even have a different date, you know? It's like
Yes.
ahead like
Yes.
10 hours or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, and so how old were your kids when you left?
They were 6 and 2. My daughter turned 3 ever since being here, so they're 6 and 3 now.
Mm-hmm. Do they adapted super fast to the language as you hoped?
Oh my gosh, they're already fluent. We've been here now for almost 10 months and they're completely fluent in Mandarin. It was harder for my 6-year-old son at the beginning to adapt. My 2-year-old, she was so young that it's just easy for her. But my son, he struggled at first, but I would say within the first couple months, he started to hit his stride. And then at 4 months, he had this like language boom. And we were
Oh,
shocked. We were just like, oh my gosh, we hear him at the playground talking to other kids, like almost fluent. It was amazing.
and for you, um, was it like also like hard to get back into the language, or was this not a problem?
That's
Just
a
or
good
a
question.
bit rusty?
Yes. If I did find I was surprised because I had lived here, like I mentioned, when I was a teenager. So in between high school and college, I
Mhm.
stayed in the city in Taipei, it's the main city, and I was so dedicated to mastering Mandarin, which is my third language, because in the home I really only spoke English and Hakka for the most part.
Mhm.
And I got to college level fluency that at that time at 18
Mhm.
I passed all my tests and was able to achieve college level fluency in Mandarin. And then I moved back to the US after that and kind of didn't use it very consistently for like what,
Right.
almost 20 years, 15 plus years. I was surprised coming back this time that even though I speak Hakka, which is a similar language but mutually unintelligible, I speak it every single day. That's my native tongue. I'm fluent in it. I found it like difficult to switch from Hakka to Mandarin this time now that I'm
Mm,
36 and I think I've lost some brain cells after having two kids.
okay.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it was kind of awkward like, oh, I'm not fluent like I thought I was.
okay. And then, but it came back to you?
Because I work from home and I'm not like the other thing was when I was younger, I was in the city and I'm very social, right? So I was just surrounded every single day using Mandarin only. Now I work from home and my kids are in school, so they speak Mandarin, I would say, more fluently than I do right now. Like it just comes to them very easily because they're socializing with it. Whereas all my clients are English speaking, so I'm still kind of speaking English all day. And when I'm out of the house with my family, we still speak mostly Hakka. So
Mhm.
Mandarin, I speak with my neighbors and when I'm, at the store and going out, but I wouldn't, some of it came back to me, but not to the level of fluency that I was when I was younger.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe it will come. And wait, and how long are you now there?
We've been here for 10 months, 10 months,
Oh,
but we
10
plan
months.
on
Oh,
staying longer. Yeah.
okay. So you're still kind of fresh.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess in terms of like relocating, it's fresh, but for me, this is home for me and I've lived here before, so it
Uh-huh.
feels like I've been here for a long time without as much
Ireland.
improvement as I was used to in the past.
Yeah. And for your husband, does he also think like, is it like easy for him too, or?
My husband refused to learn the language. He
Oh no.
doesn't, yeah. He said he claims that language isn't his thing. So that was actually a big caveat for us moving here. Like he was resistant to it at first because he was so scared of having to interact in a second language. And when he came here, I think we don't live in Taipei. We don't live in a big city. And
Mm-hmm.
so in Taipei, you can get around with just English quite easily because it's such a metropolitan city. But we live in a smaller town, where my family lives. And there are a few people who do speak English, but it's not everywhere you go. So he took a while to sort of warm up to regular things like picking up the kids from school and,
Mm-hmm.
going grocery shopping and things like that. And finding out there's so much communication that can happen without
Mm-hmm.
language, right?
Yeah, but he refused to speak Mandarin
Yeah,
or
he doesn't want to learn it at all. He's just
any.
he
Okay.
tried. He tried for one semester. He said it was too hard.
Or maybe it will just come at one point.
He picks up on words and phrases here and there, but I don't think he's dedicated to like ever
Okay.
establishing fluency. Yeah.
He's like your dad.
That's a good point. And my dad learned out of necessity. He learned English after being in the US for over 20 years when my mom and he actually divorced and he was sort of forced to learn finally on his own.
Was though the political trouble, not trouble, but you know what, when it was in the news, like lately when all the Ukraine stuff happened, was
Yeah.
that ever like a thing for you? Were you doubted to go?
That is a great question. I would say for sure, um, it's been a topic of conversation going
Mhm.
anywhere in the world as you watch sort of political unrest unfold in many areas,
Mhm.
and particularly with Taiwan and its proximity and its relationship to China, there
Yeah.
can feel like there's tension and strain. But for people who have only recently seen the news about China and Taiwan's tensions, it's not new for us who are nationals of Taiwan. Like I grew
Right.
up my whole life hearing that China's mad at Taiwan, and if they wanted to bomb us, they could. And like my husband was scared of it at first, and then after moving here and realizing how constant it is, yet how nothing really changes in our day to day life, he started to
Mhm.
feel the same way we do, which is just like we feel like it's a lot of talk, and there's no use in living in fear every single day. So we just live our day-to-day life, and honestly I think it's kind of a misconception that living in countries like the US are any safer, right? Like we experience sort of
Other
other
terrors.
yeah, forms of violence and lack of safety, and I feel much safer having my kids in school here than
Mhm.
I did in the US with the issues that were happening in the US around school safety.
Right. All right, let's change subjects a little bit. I just wanted to ask you if there's still some things that you miss.
I don't miss much in the US. I feel much more at home here in Taiwan. I probably just miss people, but the beautiful thing about, the internet has been that we can stay connected so well with, the people that we love. And one thing I found is that even I think after the pandemic, our relationships back home shifted a lot. I was, or maybe also as we've transitioned into like, having kids and at the age of life where we have
Yeah.
our families and that's
Yeah.
kind of like our priority. um, I kind of feel like I wasn't seeing my friends as much as I was talking to them on the phone or FaceTiming them, and I can still do that even while I'm here. So I miss people, but we're still connected.
Yeah. What is there that where you say like it makes you feel like home?
Here in
Bes
Taiwan,
Yeah, besides that your family is there.
I have really strong memories of being here as a child. And
Mhm.
um, the part of Taiwan that my family is from, it's more developed now than it was when I was young, but I can still walk down my road and walk past rice paddies, right? And watch the rice grow and be in tune with the cycles of nature, and have cranes flying nearby and animals, and just a sense of more connection to like a slower way of life,
Mhm.
um, and grounded to earth and community. I feel much more of that here than I did in the US.
Okay. Is there but is there still something where it's harder for you to get used to? Or like culturally?
Culturally, hmm, again, maybe different than some of your guests. For me, culturally, I feel at home because it feels like my
Mhm.
culture. I could speak maybe on behalf of my husband, who had some culture shock coming here. Um, he is not used to the way people drive here.
Oh, okay.
When we were, it's gotten better than when I was younger. It used to be very crazy and lawless driving, and now there's a lot of laws implemented, but you'll still run into people who are driving the old way, where it's kind of just like there are no lights, there's no stop signs, there's no rules, and so
Right.
it's kind of crazy. And the funniest thing is that there's a lot of elder folks who
Okay.
like the we've now built sidewalks. It's much more developed than it ever was before. So there's sidewalks everywhere, but you'll see people in their like 70s, 80s and 90s walking in the middle of the road
Oh no,
every
that is
day, all the
dangerous.
time. Yes. And Michael's like, why are they doing that? That's dangerous. And we have like, they'll just stop traffic and they'll just walk with their carts, and like they're like living their old way of life in our
Right.
new modern society. And he's like, why are they doing that? And I'm like, they just haven't changed. Like their town has changed around them, but they're just,
Uh-huh.
they're the way it's always been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And other things where you say like it's hard for you to get used to, maybe I don't know, like bureaucracy is different
Yes,
or
that's a great example. So in doing the immigration process for my kids and my husband, it's still also very old fashioned. Like everything is done by hand and on paper.
oh,
Down to we were late filing a certain document one day,
uh-huh.
and in the US it would either be like computerized, like maybe there's an override, maybe you restart the process, or you're just sorry, you're out of luck. Here in Taiwan, you wait for a particular person in the office to come talk with you. It's almost like you're sent to the principal's office, given a
Uh-huh.
chastisement. Then you have to, by hand, write a letter of apology and explain
What?
why your document is late. You have to seal it with your family chop. Then you give this handwritten like apology letter with the official form that you filled out in order to like establish residency or whatever the case may be. And so it's still very old fashioned in that way, where like a particular person has the authority to make the decision and override, and it's still very much face to face, person to person. It's not computerized. You're not a number in the system. So it's like beautiful in some ways, and in other ways it's like very inefficient.
Right. Because I thought like it would be super modern and
Modern.
everything would be like very like advanced and techy.
There's that too. Michael, my husband, comments on it all the time. He's like, they had tap pay decades ago. Like they're one of the earliest pioneers of tap pay with your phone, or having like you have a an ID card that you can tap and ride the bus. You can tap and pay for it at your
Right.
7-Eleven. We can pay our bills and our taxes. We can pay our parking tickets at 7-Eleven by just tapping and paying everything.
Uh-huh.
All of our bills are QR codes. You can pay online. You can pay at the
Okay.
convenience store. There's systems that are so modern and so automated. We have stores where you can go in and they're like personless stores, and you just like you can get I just saw one. It was completely instant noodles. It was an entire restaurant of instant noodles. You walk up to a kiosk, you pay for your noodles. It's a somewhat honor system, but there's also cameras there.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
then you like make your instant noodles by yourself. So we have very modern systems, but government is like preserving ancient traditions, I guess.
All right. I mean, I'm just more confused that you have to write an apology.
Yes.
This
That
is
surprised
like
me too.
weird.
That definitely surprised me. And talked to this particular government official in this whatever office, like talk to them almost like begging them to give you a chance.
Oh, yeah. And what is if that person doesn't like you?
Exactly. We've had like decisions made based off of one single person, and it doesn't match up with anything that we read on their website. Like we would try to prepare for the entire immigration process, and then we'd have one person tell us yes to this, and then someone else tell us no. And it's like their word overrides everything in that moment. And it
Okay.
was frustrating, especially for my husband who doesn't understand the culture. It was frustrating for me coming from like a efficiency and procedural standpoint, but
Mhm.
understanding our culture, I was able to like have a little bit more patience with it. But it was
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. Was the switch though back to the culture different or like hard for you? I mean, because like you grew up in the US,
Mm-hmm.
but your family was probably you had like the same traditions.
Yes, in the home, I grew up very traditionally Hakka. So, in that sense, it wasn't hard. It was the first time I ever lived in Taiwan as a mother. So I
Mm,
think the hardest thing was embodying the cultural expectations of being a mom. Now, in
okay.
a place where I'd always just gotten to come and be a child before, even as a teenager, I was sort of just always taken care of by family. And then this time, navigating enrolling my kids in school and making sure that they're adjusted and doing well. And we did experience some hardship at the beginning with our kids like not being socialized the same way as the kids here in Taiwan. So when we would be out in places, our kids would be the loudest kids and they'd be like running
Uh,
around like crazy, which maybe is more socially acceptable in the US, but here in
right.
Taiwan it's a different custom, and
Mm,
kids are given lots of freedom, but they really respect like time and place. Like on the playgrounds here are designed for kids to just go wild and play with one another and be kids. And even schools are designed with that really like um protecting childhood. They have play areas everywhere in their school, not just one playground, just like outside of every classroom there's play areas. But they design things like that with the intention that kids would learn this is where you play. And then when you go like to a restaurant, for example, it's not an area to play, and you are expected to be able to sit quietly and eat your meal with your family. And my kids weren't really up to code when we first came
okay.
here.
Yes.
And it was like me trying to navigate, like, I don't want to project shame onto my children, but you
Mhm.
feel as a parent a little embarrassed that your kids are the only ones that are like loud and out of
Yeah.
order. So I
Yeah.
had to navigate that tension and just sort of like educate my kids without, shaming them,
I
and beating
know,
them
but
down.
it's hard when they're so little. It's
Yes,
like
yes.
because they probably also didn't understand.
Yes, and then with my kids being at the two different ages too, like especially my 3-year-old, she turned 3 while we were here. It was almost easier to have a little bit more grace with her. And then my 6-year-old, we're kind of like, come on, buddy, like you're still young, but we hope that you would learn sort of like what we need from you quickly. And I think looking back, it may have been a little bit too hard on him, especially because he's also adjusting to such a big move. So like I said, that was probably the hardest thing for me, was as a mom trying to
Mm-hmm.
support my kids in a healthy way while also sort of setting them up for success here and making sure that they weren't, sort of ostracized while they're here.
Right. Would you say there are also other aspects in upbringing children that are different or that are now other otherly expected of you?
Yes. One thing I was actually a little bit more anxious about and ended up being better than I expected was the sort of the pressure in school for kids to perform at a really young age at a high level. And
Mhm.
so I was anxious that maybe my kids would, just have too much pressure on them and fall behind and be sort of like always reprimanded at school. And that I was actually surprised. The teachers here have been so supportive of my kids, and their learning has really boomed without much pressure. Like, I don't do homework with the kids at all. So
Mhm.
when they come home, they're able to just relax. And they actually have help from their teachers getting their homework done. So my son has homework. My 3-year-old doesn't have any homework. She just gets to
Okay.
go to. We ask my 3-year-old, when you go to school, what do you do? She goes, I eat, I sleep, I dance, I play. So she's living her best
Yeah,
life.
but I was also like, homework? Wait, we never do
Yeah.
homework.
So that is a big difference. Like, there wasn't much homework given when my son was in kindergarten in the US.
Yeah.
Here they have homework. And, so I was nervous. Like, is it going to be too much pressure on him? But then he started telling me, he's like, Mom, I actually love all of my hard classes. I don't like the easy ones because they're too boring. So he took to it really well. And he is now writing Mandarin characters. Like, he's writing fluently, he's
Oh,
speaking
awesome.
fluently, he's reading fluently, like within 10 months of being here. And I'm always checking in, like, is it still fun? He's like, yeah, it's fun, except for when it's boring if I already know everything. So
Mhm.
he actually
Okay,
loves the challenge.
nice. And you got a smart one.
He loves to learn, yes.
Yeah. And is the school system different? I mean, I'm
Yes.
just wondering about the times.
Yes. Yes. So the Times is actually the public schooling system, for my son in first grade. It only goes from 8 a.m. to 12:30. And
Okay.
then, yeah, so after 12:30, you have to enroll them in an after school program if you're not able to pick them up and bring them home. So most students, have to go to an after school program
Yeah.
while their parents are working. And we were lucky enough to get into the after school program at the actual school site, so he doesn't have to travel to another private. They call them like after school classes or cram schools. And that's where he gets support with his homework, but we can sign him up for elective classes like Lego class and art class.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so actually all of the instruction of the kids all happens between 8 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. So, and they have 50-minute periods and 10 minutes of play in between. So instead of just like one recess and one lunch in the US and then having to keep learning all the way until 2:30 p.m., they learn more in less amount of time with more playtime.
Okay,
So
wow, that's
it's been
great.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. When I grew up, I had also just school until 12.
Mm.
And I think like later when I was in a German high school, well, it's not the
Mm-hmm.
same, but when I was a teenager, my school ended at 1.
Wow. So you never had to stay in school until like, let's say 2:30 or
No,
3.
I mean now they do it, but I guess like I mean it's over 20 years ago, and I
Mm.
feel like then I mean for me I never even like put my head around it, but there was always somebody at home, for the people. But I think
Mm.
nowadays a lot of both parents are working, so a lot of kids go to like all day schools as well.
Right, right, right.
When I was little, that was not the case. Like I didn't have like late afternoon classes until like maybe 11th or 12th grade.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I think I see the benefit in it. I think that they're actually able to learn better in these like shorter, concentrated time blocks and then have enough time to play and just be a kid and practice what they're learning instead of just like sitting in class all day long?
Okay, so you're just there 10 months, but are you planning on visiting the US soon?
Yes, actually, we're gonna spend the summer back in the US, but not in California where we moved from. My husband's family is in Hawaii, and so we've typically always spent summer with them. Yeah, my husband grew up in Hawaii. That's where he's from.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll be heading over there for the entire month of July, and then we'll stop by California to see friends and family there for a very short trip before we head back to the to
Sounds
Taiwan.
horrible.
We can't complain. We're living the
Well,
dream.
yeah, this sounds really
Yes.
nice. And I also wanted to ask you about your podcast.
Yes, so I have a podcast called Everyone Needs a Story for the Campfire. And for me, I've always loved stories. And now, coincidentally, maybe not so
Uh-huh.
coincidentally, that's become the focus of my work. It was the focus of my dissertation study. But this podcast is a little bit on the lighter side, I would say. It's oh, well, I don't know if my guests and audience would say it's a lighter side. I tried to make it a little bit lighter, but the concept behind it is that if you just ask people to prepare a couple of stories and bring it to the proverbial campfire, just like in the olden days, everyone would sit around a campfire and share their stories, that no matter how different we are in our backgrounds or the experiences we've gone through in life, we're gonna find things that connect us in the lessons we've learned, in the themes that we explore through our stories. And so it's been a huge experiment. This first season, and the overarching theme is stories that reach. So I invited guests on who all have experience publicly sharing their stories. So from being a TV news journalist to authors to professional poets. And it was really interesting when I asked everyone to submit their stories prior to the season starting,
Mhm.
which themes emerged this season. Guess what the number one theme was, or the top two themes?
I don't know, like horror stories, murder stories.
Not murder stories. That would be interesting if I just invited an entire
Oh
season of
no.
murder. These are like personal stories that they're exploring.
Oh no, like what is it?
Grief and loss. So I was
Oh,
like,
okay.
yeah, people are going,
Serious.
and it was
Uh-huh.
interesting for me to sit with these stories, and people are still very much like coming out of the pandemic and like losing senses of identity. Like you would think like 4 years
Okay.
later, but I found that even people who are like on the surface, performing at a high level, they're when asked which stories would you like to bring to the campfire, the themes that they've been exploring with me have been more on the deeper side, or the more introspective side, I would say, in
Oh,
processing some of
okay.
these themes.
Okay, so it's not always like happy stories, it's also sometimes very serious.
Yeah, it ended up being that way, sort of unprompted. It was more of an
Hmm.
experiment, like what stories are asking to be told right
Uh-huh.
now, and that's where this season of guests took it. I had a couple, who were like love and resilience, but even the resilience story, it's like you're sharing about moving through tough times and then kind of getting out to the other side. So yeah, it wasn't as much lighthearted stories or friendship stories or adventure stories, not this season.
Okay, and you can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts?
Everywhere. We have YouTube, we're on Spotify. You can also access it from my website, drjoeyliu.com. That might be the easiest place to find it, because the
Mhm.
title, Everyone Needs a Campfire, is kind of long, but you can find it easily if you type in just my name, drjoeyliu.com, and hit the podcast page.
And I make sure that I will put the link in the show notes for this.
Awesome.
And so we're talking about podcasts, but do you know the podcast Taiwanika?
Taiwanika, no, I haven't. I follow lots of Taiwan accounts, but I haven't heard that one.
So, so I guess like this is right up your alley because like he's an American, she is from Taiwan. It's a couple. They
Ah,
live in the US and he also speaks Mandarin.
mm-hmm.
And so they talk about cultural differences between the
Yes.
two ones. And sometimes it's just like easy, funny stories like online shopping or shopping in general. US versus Taiwan. And then
For
sometimes it's
sure.
like also like raising children or like friendships. So all these like
Yes.
differences.
That's beautiful. That's awesome. Thank you for putting me on that. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, check it out. It's fun. And also like I know it because Eric, the host, was our guest on this podcast.
Yes, that
So, but
makes
I thought I will
sense.
tell you about it because I like it a lot, and I think you will like it too.
Yeah, for sure. I'll have to check it out. There's so many
Um,
little things that are like funny little differences when you really like peel back culture. So yeah, I'm sure I love it.
and so I have one last question that I haven't asked you yet.
Yes.
How about or like how did you guys make friends?
We have most of our friends here are just in the neighborhood, you know. I love the fact that we can just walk outside and have a community experience, go to the
Mm-hmm.
park. But I will say we also we don't necessarily like have friends where we're like, hey, do you want to go out to dinner, or do you want to do this and that.
Mm-hmm.
um my husband and I are both more introverted, and because I have so much family here, our weekends are kind of
Uh-huh.
just filled with family. That's our social life
Okay.
here. I have cousins my age who all have kids, and my dad
Perfect.
is one of seven, and we kind of just
Okay.
like to hang out at my grandparents' house like old times. So our version of socializing here is quite different than in the US. But it's nice too that we'll always just run into familiar faces with our neighbors, and our kids socialize with their kids. And it's been easy, like as easy as walking outside and being a part of the community.
Yeah, no, I mean, socializing is fine as long as it's not like being by yourself, right? So,
Yeah, we're
I
definitely
mean,
not
if so,
isolated. Yeah,
socializing with family, that's great.
yes.
Like, and they
And
put you probably make all the plans, and then you're never lonely again.
never, never
Yeah.
lonely. And my husband too, because he's a 6'4" black man,
Okay.
so he
Uh-huh.
stands out in the
Yeah.
community. And people will come up to him and try, like, you know, younger people, they'll want to practice their English with him.
Oh, right.
So he
Yes.
has people that come and talk to him all the time. And he's made a friend with one of the security guards at my kids' school who will be like, help me read this word in the newspaper. And like it's been beautiful. We've had lots of little interactions, and people are very friendly. So we have no lack of social interactions.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I think I got all my questions. Thank you very much for being on my
Awesome.
podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved talking to you, Victoria.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was my interview with Dr. Joey Liu, and you can find her podcast, Everyone Needs a Story for the Campfire. You find it in the show notes, or of course wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can also find another link to her website on the show notes as well, and all my contact information as well in the podcast show notes. And yeah, don't forget to check out the show notes, I guess. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and you will tune in again for another one next week. Episodes are always out on Thursdays. And yeah, that was it for this week. I'm your host, Victoria. Until then, bye.